There is a $28,000 auto loan on my credit file. Opened March 14th at Lakewood Auto Group on County Road 7. And on March 14th, I was home in bed with bronchitis. I have the sick day email to my supervising attorney and a telehealth visit record to prove it. That was the first sentence I would say to anyone who mattered. Because the moment I saw the notification at 6:47 a.m. on that Tuesday in early April, I understood not just what I was looking at, but what came next. But let me back up to the beginning, to the moment the notification actually hit the screen. It was still dark outside. The kitchen was the kind of quiet that only happens before dawn. Not peaceful, just empty. The sound that silence makes. My coffee maker had finished its cycle and was ticking softly on the counter, releasing that first clean steam. The phone was face up beside the toaster, exactly where I'd left it the night before. And the screen was already lit with a notification I didn't recognize. I have my phone set to silent most nights. The brightness had come up on its own, and the notification was waiting. The notification was from a credit monitoring app I had installed 14 months earlier, in the parking lot of my dentist's office on a warm January afternoon. Doctor, Patel had mentioned. In that offhanded way people do during the last 3 minutes of an appointment, that her teenage daughter had gone through an identity theft situation. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to be inconvenient. She'd said, "You should really have something watching your credit." And then I was paying at the front desk. And then I was sitting in my car with the engine off, phone in hand, downloading an app I would then forget existed. I installed it, signed up for the free tier, enabled notifications, and set the phone down on the passenger seat. 14 months went by. The app sent me exactly 0 alerts. And then at 6:47, on April 4th, it fired once. I picked the phone up and opened the notification. It took me 4 minutes to read through it completely. Not because it was long, but because I had to read each line 3 times to make sure I understood what I was seeing. There was a new account, an installment loan, principal amount, $28,000. Account opened March 14th. Creditor. Lakewood Auto Group on County Road 7. Origination timestamp 11:07 a.m. I set the phone down. I picked it back up. March 14th. That was a Thursday. 3 weeks ago. I had been home on March 14th. I had been home and sick. And on a video call with a telehealth nurse at 2:40 p.m. that same afternoon, confirming that the cough was bronchitis and not allergies, and getting prescribed azithromycin. On the morning of March 14th, at 8:51 a.m., I had sent an email to my supervising attorney requesting a sick day. The email was still in my sent folder. I reached over and poured myself a cup of coffee. I didn't drink it yet. I held the mug between both hands and looked at the phone again. The number sitting in front of me wasn't just a loan amount. It was a calculation I'd done in my sleep for the past 11 years. I'm a senior paralegal at Alderton and Pace, and I spend half my day reading loan documents, calculating debt-to-income ratios, advising clients on what they can afford. I know my own ratio the way some people know their weight, 37.3%. My pending mortgage refinance, approved 6 weeks earlier, with a closing date 60 days away, had been approved with a maximum debt-to-income cap of 43%. That was the number the lender would tolerate. $28,000 as a monthly installment would add approximately $600 to $700 to my debt obligation. That would push my ratio to somewhere between 41.2 and 41.8%, still under the cap, technically. But here was the problem. The moment I reported this loan to my lender, and I would have to report it, they would recalculate. And the moment they recalculated, they could decide I was no longer the borrower they had approved. They could deny the refinance and walk away without explanation. Even if it didn't kill the refinance. $700 per month was $8,400 per year. I was comfortable. I was not comfortable with a $700 surprise. I drank the coffee anyway. It was too hot and burned the back of my throat, which seemed appropriate. I set the mug down and opened my messages. I looked at the home screen until I found the folder labeled Paper Trail. I had created it 13 years ago, the month after my divorce was finalized, when my ex-husband was insisting he'd paid back a joint car loan that he had not actually paid back. He had said the credit card was cancelled. It wasn't. He'd claimed the debts were resolved. They weren't. Every time I presented him with evidence, a bank statement, a screenshot, a credit report showing the account was still active, he'd suggested I must have misremembered, or that the creditor had made an error, or that he'd handled it, and I simply hadn't been given the information. In the end, I was left holding $14,000 in joint debt that technically we both owed equally under state law, and practically only I ever paid down. The day the divorce was final. I opened a folder on my phone and made a decision. I would never again be caught unprepared when someone tried to convince me that my own records weren't reliable. I would keep bank statements, credit reports, account confirmations, letters from creditors, screenshots of balances, anything concrete, anything that proved something had actually happened. The folder had grown slowly over 13 years. A mortgage document, a property tax receipt, a car insurance renewal. Nothing urgent. Just the habit of a woman who had learned that documentation was cheaper than belief. This morning, I opened the folder and took the first screenshot, the notification, then the full account details. Then I opened my email and found the sick day request from March 14th and took a screenshot of that. I opened my calendar app, located March 14th, and there was the entry, sick, WFH, 3 words. Then I went to my health app and pulled up the telehealth appointment history, March 14th, 2:40 p.m. Video appointment for bronchitis, 12 minutes, azithromycin prescribed. The $25 copay had been processed and was visible in my insurance account. I saved the screenshot to the folder. Then I set the phone down and sat with the kitchen getting slowly lighter as the sun came up. I didn't feel panic. I felt something more like confirmation. The moment when a theory you've been quietly holding becomes a fact you have to act on. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I sat there with my coffee cooling and my phone in front of me, and I thought about what I already knew and what I still needed to find out. Someone had forged my signature. That was the first fact. Someone had walked into Lakewood Auto Group on County Road, 7/11/07, on March 14th, and signed loan documents using my name as if they had the legal right to borrow $28,000 on my credit. I needed to know who. I needed to know what form of ID they'd shown. I needed to know if the dealership had bothered to cross-check anything at all. But before I did any of that, I needed to make sure I had everything documented. Not like 13 years ago, when I'd spent months trying to convince someone that my own life story was worth believing. This time, I was going to have everything ready. By 7:15 a.m. I had pulled together the sick day email, the calendar entry, the telehealth appointment record. I had the CVS pharmacy receipt from March 14th at 4:15 p. Sent me. The same afternoon I'd been on that video call. Showing the Mucinex purchase. I had the original credit alert notification. I had accessed the full account details from Lakewood's website and screenshotted those too. Funny, the co-borrower field was blank, which meant whoever had done this had applied in my name alone as the sole borrower. That told me something about the dealership's process, and none of it was reassuring. I renamed the folder. It was no longer just paper trail. It was now March 14th proof. Then I did something very carefully. I didn't call my supervising attorney. I didn't call the mortgage company. I didn't open my banking app to see what else I could prove. I had narrowed everything down to a single question. And I had narrowed that question down to a single person. Someone very close to me. Someone whose name came to mind the moment I saw the notification and stayed there. But I was going to be careful. I was going to exhaust every other possibility first, so that when I finally said her name out loud, I would have more than a theory. I would have facts. I picked up the phone. I called Lakewood Auto Group, and I waited for someone to answer while the morning got lighter and my coffee went cold on the counter beside me. By 7:15 a.m., I had shifted from shock into something more useful. Shock makes you paralyzed. Strategy makes you dangerous. And I was going to need to be dangerous, but not yet. First, I was going to need to be methodical. I was going to build a case so clean and so complete that when I finally accused someone of something, there would be no space left for argument. The first call was to Metro First Credit Union. I had the account number from the Lakewood paperwork, and I knew from my years in family law that credit unions kept impeccable records. The woman who answered, her name was Patricia, and she had that particular tone of someone working in a call centre before 7:30. Connected me to a fraud specialist within 2 minutes. I gave the account number. I gave the origination date. I explained in the careful language I used with clients at Alderton and Pace that I was calling to report unauthorized activity and that I needed to understand what documentation had been collected at the time of the loan origination. Not accusatory, just procedural. Patricia's tone shifted. She pulled the file. She confirmed the loan was in my name. She confirmed the origination date. She also confirmed something else. The loan had been taken out with a 36-month term at a 24% interest rate, which meant the monthly payment was somewhere in the neighborhood of $900 to $950 per month, not $700, closer to $950. I did the math in my head. That pushed my debt-to-income ratio even higher than I'd calculated. I thanked Patricia. I said I would be filing a report with Metro PD and that she should expect to be contacted. Then I hung up and called Lakewood Auto Group directly. The phone line rang 4 times before someone picked up. A man's voice, professional but tired, like he'd already been at work for too long. Lakewood Auto Group. This is Owen speaking. How can I help you today? I told him my name. I told him I was calling about a loan account opened in my name on March 14th, and I needed to speak with someone in the finance department about the origination process. He transferred me without asking questions. I held for 93 seconds. I timed it, and then a different voice came on the line. This one was smoother, better practiced. This is Owen Pratt, finance manager. How can I help you? I said. Mr. Pratt, I'm calling about account number. And I read off the full account number. Opened on March 14th of this year at 1107A. Mim. I'm a senior paralegal at Alderton and Pace Law Group, and I need to clarify a few things about the documentations that was collected at origination. The tone on the other end shifted instantly. I could hear it happening. Owen Pratt had been gearing up to speak to a confused customer, probably a woman calling about a payment or a paperwork question. And suddenly he realized he was speaking to someone who knew how lending documentation actually worked. He said, I see. And what's your question? His voice had changed. Shorter sentences, less elaboration. He was already managing. I said, I was not present at the dealership on March 14th at 11:07 a.m. I have a documented telehealth appointment at 2:40 p.m. That same afternoon, and a work email sent at 8:51 that day requesting a sick day. So I need to know, what form of identification was presented at the point of sale? And is a copy retained in your file? There was a silence on the other end. I counted 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. It stretched out 19 seconds. I know because I kept counting. Owen Pratt was processing what he had just heard, and more importantly, what it meant. He was calculating whether this was a woman calling to dispute a payment or a woman calling with evidence. By second 19, he had reached his conclusion. He said, Can I have your name and phone number? I'm going to need to look into this and call you back. I said, You can look into it, but the answer I need is, what form of ID was presented, and is a copy in the file? I kept my voice level, not aggressive, not pleading, just the voice of someone stating what information she required. He said, I can't discuss that without verifying your identity on the account. You'll need to call back with... Dororopu, I said. The only identity on the account is mine. And if you cannot confirm to me the actual person whose name is on this loan, what documentation was collected before that loan was funded, then I will be filing a fraud report with Metro PD this afternoon, and their investigators will make that request of you formally, which will include documentation of why your due diligence process failed to catch this. I paused. Which is which? Another silence. Shorter this time. Maybe 5 seconds. He said, Let me check the file. Can you hold? I held for 2 minutes and 34 seconds. I used the time to add a note to the folder on my phone. Owen Pratt, finance manager, reluctant to confirm details. Possible knowledge of improper documentation. I don't know that he had knowledge, but I know what hesitation sounds like in a room where there's a $28,000 liability sitting on a desk. He came back on the line. A Florida driver's license was presented at origination. A copy is in the file, I said. What name was on the Florida license? The question hung there. He knew what he was about to say next would make this real, would move this from a phone call into something that had actual consequences. He said, "That information is in the file, but I can't discuss customer information over the phone without proper verification. You understand?" "I understand." I said, "I'm the customer. The name on the loan is my name. So whose name was on the Florida license?" He said, "I'm going to need to verify your identity before I can release that information. If you'd like to come in..." "I've heard you," I said. "No, I'm going to be filing a report this afternoon. When the police contact you, you can provide the information to them. Have a good day, Mr. Pratt." I hung up before he could say anything else. I did it calmly, but my hands were shaking. Not because I was panicked, because I was right. A Florida license was in the file. My name was on the loan. And someone had walked into Lakewood Auto Group with a piece of identification that allowed a 36-month, $28,000 auto loan to be funded in my name. The only question was, whose face was on that ID? I already knew the answer. I had known it since I read the notification at 6:47 a.m. But I didn't say it out loud yet. Not until I had built enough documentation that saying it out loud was just reciting facts instead of making an accusation. I spent the next 4 hours pulling paper. I opened my email and found the sick day request I'd sent to my supervising attorney. "Marcus," at exactly 8:51 a.m. on March 14th. "Hi, Marcus. Homesick with what's probably bronchitis. I'll check email, but won't be in office today. Thanks. Vivian." I took a screenshot and saved it to the folder. Then I pulled my calendar entry for March 14th. Sick, WFH, in my own handwriting. Screenshot. Then the telehealth appointment confirmation, timestamped 2:40 p.m. on that same date, screenshot. Then the pharmacy receipt from CVS, 4 blocks from my apartment, showing a Mutinex purchase at 4:15 p.m. on March 14th. The receipt had my rewards card number on it. Screenshot. I pulled my insurance claim showing the copay for the telehealth visit. I pulled my work calendar showing that I had marked myself out of office for the entire day. I found a text conversation with my mother where I'd sent her a photo of my apartment and mentioned being homesick that day. It was time-stamped March 14th at 5:47 p.m. I pulled my banking records showing a charge to CVS at 4:15 p.m. on March 14th, just to have the transaction documented from another angle. By 10:30 a.m., I had taken 11 separate screenshots and saved them into a subfolder within March 14th proof. Then I printed everything. I have a printer in my apartment, a multifunction HP that my mother insists is a waste of money, but which I have used exactly 9 times in the past 18 months. And I was about to use it for the 10th. The pages came out warm and slightly damp with toner. I arranged them in chronological order. The email first, then the calendar entry, then the telehealth confirmation, then the CVS receipt, then the insurance claim, then the banking charge, then the text message, then the telehealth timestamp screenshot. 8 documents. No gaps. A complete chronicle of where I had been on March 14th, time-stamped and verifiable by external parties. Then I added the 9th document to the folder, the original credit alert notification from 6:47 a.m. Printed and dated. By 11:40 a.m., I had a file folder with 9 pieces of paper, all of them proving that I was not in a car dealership on County Road. 7 at 11:07 on March 14th, all of them proving that someone else had walked in with a form of identification and signed a loan in my name. All of them proving that the bank's due diligence had failed so catastrophically that they had funded $28,000 based on paperwork they clearly hadn't cross-checked against the borrower's actual availability. I had not called Jade. I had not accused anyone. I had not said the name out loud. I had only taken the fact I already knew and surrounded it with documentation so complete that when the time came to say it out loud, it would not be an accusation. It would be a recitation of facts. And facts, unlike accusations, cannot be disputed. They can only be recorded. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the 9 pages in front of me. The coffee was cold now. My hands had stopped shaking. My heart rate was steady. I was ready for the next conversation, but I wasn't going to make that call yet. Not until I had one more piece of information. Not until I heard Owen Pratt confirm what the law required him to confirm. I picked up my phone. I opened my text messages. I found the conversation thread with Jade, dated March 15th. The morning after the loan was signed, there was a photo message from her, sent at 9:12 a.m. A plate of food, something homemade. The text below it read, "Thinking of you." I had answered with a heart emoji. At the time, I had thought it was sweet. At the time, I had not understood what I was looking at. I understood now. I took a screenshot of the message and added it to my folder. 9 documents became 10. It wasn't proof of anything, not technically. But it was evidence of timing. Evidence of someone who had just committed a crime and was managing her guilt the only way she knew how. I looked at the time on my phone. 11:47 Samim. I had just over 4 hours until I needed to be at the police precinct. 4 hours to sit with this and not make the call yet. 4 hours to make sure I had done everything possible to document this before I said the words out loud. I closed the folder. I left the papers on the kitchen table. And I waited. I sat at my kitchen table at noon with my phone in front of me, and the text thread with Jade pulled up on the screen. This wasn't the conversation I was about to have. This was the one that had already happened. 3 weeks of it. 22 days of messages going back and forth. And I was reading them in reverse. From April 4th backward to March 15th. Watching the pattern become visible the way a photograph develops in water. The more recent the message, the warmer it sounded. The further back I scrolled, the warmer it had to sound. Because the further back was the period when she was driving a car. She had stolen my name to finance. March 30th. A text asking if I wanted her to pick up groceries on her way home from Westbrook. March 27th. A photo of Jade at work with the caption, "Thinking about what you said about the new director." March 22nd. "Mum, I'm so sorry I've been distant. I promise I'm going to do better." March 19th. "How are you feeling? Still sick?" And then March 15th, the photograph. I stopped at March 15th and just looked at it for a long time. It was a plate of food. Something that looked like it had been cooked with intention. Real effort. The background was soft and blurred, the way smartphone photos get when someone is focusing carefully on the thing in the foreground. The message below the photo said simply, "Thinking of you." I had answered immediately when I first saw it. Just a heart emoji. At the time, I remember thinking it was sweet. My daughter, 24 years old, working as a shift supervisor at Westbrook Apparel, and she had found time to cook something and send me a photo. Proof of love. Proof that she was thinking about her mother. Proof that she was the kind of person who does things like that. The kind of daughter who remembers that her mother is homesick and decides to do something nice. I took a screenshot of the text and added it to my folder. Then I opened my banking app and went back to March 14th. The loan had been signed at 11:07 by 9:12 on March 15th, just 22 hours after walking into Lakewood Auto Group with a forged ID in my name. Jade had sent me that photo. What I was looking at now, understanding what I understood, was someone managing guilt the way you manage a minor inconvenience. Cook something. Send a photo. Make Mum feel special. Make sure she doesn't suspect anything is wrong. Make sure the warmth is there so when the truth arrives, she'll have to reconcile it with all these little moments of tenderness. I pulled up the earlier messages, further back into the thread. Not just the past 3 weeks, all the way back to when Jade was 19 years old and had first asked me for something that cost more than she could pay. She had called me that day. Not texted. Called? The phone ringing with a particular urgency that made me answer on the first ring. She was living in an apartment with 2 roommates across town, and her rent check had bounced, not by much, not by some astronomical amount that you could trace to recklessness or addiction or some obvious moral failure, just bounced. A bank error, she told me, sobbing, her fault. She told me 5 minutes later, which is when I understood there had been no error. She had written a check on an account that didn't have the funds because she had spent the money on something else, and then spent more money on something else after that. And by the time the rent was due, the account was empty. I didn't ask her what she'd spent it on. I didn't ask her why she hadn't checked her balance before writing the check. So I just said yes. I transferred the money. She cried and thanked me and promised she would be more careful next time. I believed her because I wanted to believe her, and because believing her meant I was a good mother, a woman who was there for her child, a woman who didn't let her daughter face consequences alone. When she was 20, her car insurance lapsed. She forgot to pay it, not an honest mistake, a simple forgetting, but a forgetting that came from not checking her email, not opening her bills, not paying attention to the infrastructure that keeps an adult life operational. She went 2 months without coverage and only remembered when a cop pulled her over and ran her plate. She called me from the side of the road, panic in her voice. The fine was going to be substantial. The fee to reinstate the policy was $340, plus the back months, plus the potential for the officer to write a ticket that she couldn't afford. I told her to put the officer on the phone. I didn't put him on the phone. I just told the dispatcher what had happened. And the officer was professional. And I paid the reinstatement fee over the phone while sitting at my desk at Alderton and Pace with my supervising attorney, Marcus, walking past and not asking questions. Then I added her to my own policy for 6 months, which meant my rates went up and my coverage went down because I was basically paying twice, Once for the reinstatement, and then again in monthly charges for carrying her on my plan. She thanked me. She said she had learned her lesson. She was going to be so much more responsible going forward. At 22, she asked me to pay off a credit card. Just this once. She said, the exact phrase landing the way a key lands in a lock. Someone at work had convinced her to apply for a card with a very high limit, and she had maxed it out on things she couldn't quite explain. I don't even remember what I bought. Mum, I'm so stupid. New clothes. Going out with friends. A tattoo that cost more than she'd anticipated. Things. The balance was $2,100. I asked her if she understood what a credit card was. She said yes. I asked her if she understood that she had borrowed money at interest. She said yes. I paid it anyway. Just this once, I said back to her, mirroring the words she had used, as if saying them would make them true, as if I was teaching her a lesson instead of buying her out of a consequence. At 23, she called me from the emergency room. She had been in a car accident, nothing serious, just a fender bender in a parking lot. But she'd had to go to the ER to rule out whiplash and document the injury in case there was a lawsuit. She didn't have insurance. Her job at Westbrook didn't offer it, and she kept meaning to buy her own policy. But it was expensive, and she was saving for something else. The details were fuzzy, shifting depending on who she was talking to. And now the ER was charging her $3,000 for an examination and a couple of x-rays and a CT scan. And she was sitting in a chair in a waiting area while nurses took her blood pressure and asked her questions. I called the billing department from my office. I explained that I was the mother of the patient and that I would be responsible for the balance. My credit card went through without declining. The ER wrote off the remaining balance as a courtesy because I'd paid the deposit so quickly and because I sounded like the kind of person who did things like that. Paid debts without negotiating, absorbed costs without question. I told Jade not to worry about paying me back. I told her that's what family does. That same year, less than 6 months later, she needed help with a security deposit on a different apartment. The first one hadn't worked out. She didn't explain why. Not really. There was something about the landlord being unfair, but the details kept changing depending on who she was talking to and when. There was something about the roommates being difficult, but she'd also said they were her best friends. The story was inconsistent, which I noticed and did not address. The security deposit was $1,800. I transferred it. After this, I said, you have to learn to manage your own money. She nodded. She meant it when she nodded. I could see that she meant it, but meaning something and doing something are not the same thing. At 24, she called me about a payday loan. She had borrowed $2,000 at an interest rate that made me pause when she said it out loud. 400%. She had to repeat it because I couldn't believe I'd heard correctly. Now she owed $4,000 and the lender was calling constantly and she didn't know what to do. The amount terrified her. I paid it. I didn't ask her what the $2,000 had been for. I didn't ask her why she had gone to a payday lender instead of asking me first. I just asked for the account number and paid it from my checking account. The balance was in my account and then it wasn't. And Jade was relieved. And I had now absorbed 6 different financial crises across 6 years. I sat at the table and added it all up in a note on my phone. Bounced rent check at 19, $1,200. Lapsed insurance and reinstatement at 20, $1,950. Credit card at 22, $2,100. ER copay at 23, $3,000. Security deposit at 23, $1,800. Payday loan at 24, $4,000. The cumulative total was $14,050. Not quite the $11,400 that would show up later in court documents. I'd missed a few smaller things. A dinner I'd paid for that she couldn't afford. A work uniform that needed replacing. A phone bill she'd forgotten to pay. 6 rescues. 6 times I had said yes when no would have meant something very different. I had not been protecting my daughter all those years. I had been training her. I had been teaching her a very specific lesson through the repetition of my yes answers. That consequences were something other people experienced. That her mother's credit, her mother's time, her mother's willingness to absorb the cost of her life. These were not finite resources. They were not things she needed to earn or respect or preserve. They were simply hers to access whenever she needed them. Because love meant no. And love meant I would never actually refuse her anything. Somewhere in the middle of all those rescues, Jade had learned that my love came with no boundaries and my resources had no bottom. The two of them together meant she could take whatever she wanted, because taking was just an extension of asking, and asking worked every single time. And so, by March 14th, she didn't even bother asking. She just took. She took a loan application into a dealership. She took my name. She took the signature I'd never given her. She took a $28,000 car and drove it home and started texting me photos of dinner like we were still the kind of people who had a normal relationship. 3 weeks she didn't tell me. 22 days of sending me warm messages and assurances that everything was fine. Nothing had changed. She loved me. 3 weeks of knowing that she was a woman who had forged her own mother's signature on a legal document. 3 weeks of driving a car financed by fraud and pretending that we were the kind of family where that wasn't happening. I closed the text thread. I put the phone down. I sat with the kitchen getting slowly warmer as the sun climbed higher in the sky. And I understood something that felt like clarity, and something that felt like a door closing very quietly. I had not been protecting my daughter. I had been practicing for the moment when I would finally stop. Every yes I'd given her was a keystroke. Every loan I'd paid off was a line in a document I wasn't writing yet. But would soon, every rescue was a habit being built. My habit of absorbing her life into mine, and what I was sitting with now was the understanding that my daughter had learned to live in a world where I would do this forever, where my answer would always be yes, where my love meant she would never face a consequence she didn't want to face. But that world didn't exist anymore. At 12:01 p.m., I picked up the phone and called the Metro Police Department non-emergency line. I did not call Jade first. I did not give her a chance to explain or minimize or reframe what she had done. I simply told the dispatcher who I was and what I needed to report. And I made the appointment that would change everything. I picked up the phone at 12:14 p.m. I noted the time in my folder because I was going to note everything from this point forward. I had the folder open on the kitchen table in front of me. 9 documents, all of them proving where I had been on March 14th. And I had opened the voice memo app on my phone before I dialed. It was recording. Jade's number was in my contacts. I'd been calling this number for 24 years, since the day she was born, and I was calling my mother from the hospital to tell her that everything had gone fine, that she had a granddaughter, that her name was Jade, and she weighed 7 pounds, 2 ounces. I pressed the call button. She answered on the third ring. "Hey, Mom," she said, and the normalcy of it, the casual greeting, the assumption that we were still the kind of people who could just talk to each other like nothing had happened, was so staggering that I almost hung up. But I didn't. I said her name. I said, "I need you to tell me about the loan." There was a pause. I counted it. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3, 4. On the 4th second, she said. "I was going to tell you. I just needed to get the first 2 payments in so it wouldn't be an issue." That sentence, I need you to understand what that sentence was. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't an apology disguised as a confession. It was a logistics explanation. What it told me, in the space of 1 sentence, was that Jade had not experienced forging my signature as theft. She had experienced it as accessing a shared resource that I had been unreasonably keeping from her. The plan, in her mind, was never to deceive me forever. The plan was to make the first 2 payments, to prove that she could handle it, to prove that she was responsible, and then tell me, and I would understand, and everything would be fine because, after all, I had always said yes before. I did not argue with her. There was no point. Argument requires that both people are starting from the same worldview, and we were not. I asked her a question instead. Did I sign those documents? Mom, Did I sign those documents? Yes or no? No, but did you write my name on those documents? I had to. They wouldn't give me the loan without. Did you write my name? Yes. But Mom, you don't understand. I was going to pay for it. I've already made 2 payments. The first payment went through on March 28th, and the second one on April 2nd. I was going to keep making them and then tell you, and you would see that I was serious about this, that I could handle it, that I wasn't just asking for a handout like I usually do. There it was. The full architecture of her thinking laid out in one desperate explanation. I had given her more than $28,000 over the years. She was keeping count, apparently, keeping a ledger of all the times I said yes. So in her mind, the $28,000 loan wasn't me giving her money. It was her taking back something that was already hers. Something that she had rightfully earned through 6 years of being her mother's daughter. And the forged signature wasn't a crime. It was a formality, an obstacle, a bureaucratic requirement that had nothing to do with the actual moral reality of the situation, which was that she needed a car, and I had demonstrated, repeatedly, that I would pay for whatever she needed. I said, "You've given me more than $28,000 over the years. I just needed to do it myself this time without having to ask." That's what she said. She was echoing her own logic back to me, and the clarity of it was so complete that I understood, in that moment, that I had built this, not the forgery. That was Jade's choice, her decision, her crime. But the conviction that she could make it, that her mother's resources were a shared asset, that asking and taking were the same thing as long as the need was real. I had built that through 6 rescues and 6 yes answers. I had built the foundation for her to believe that this was reasonable. "Jade," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Did you forge my signature?" "I didn't forge it. I signed your name because I had to. The form required a primary borrower and a cosigner, and I couldn't be both. So Did you forge my signature?" "Yes. But not to hurt you. I was going to tell you. I swear I was going to tell you." The voice memo app was still running. It had been running since before I dialed. Everything she was saying, every explanation, every justification, every piece of evidence that she genuinely believed this was a reasonable thing to do, it was all being recorded. I was not recording it to be cruel. I was recording it because I had learned, over 13 years, and through $14,000 in joint debt that my ex-husband disputed. That documentation is what separates your story from their story. And without documentation, you just have 2 people arguing about what happened. I said, "I love you." And I did. I was about to destroy my daughter's life, and I still loved her. This is the part people don't talk about. The part where you can love someone and still need to stop protecting them from consequences. "I love you," I said, "and I am going to the police this afternoon." She said, "You're not serious." I said, "I already have an appointment." I didn't, but I was going to make one. I was going to make it in the next 60 seconds, before I gave myself time to reconsider, before I talked myself back into the familiar logic of motherhood that says protecting your child is more important than protecting yourself. "Mom, please don't do this. Please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This was stupid. I was stupid. I'll pay you back everything. Just please don't do this." I hung up. I don't remember making the decision to hang up. 1 second, I was listening to my daughter beg me not to report her to the police, and the next second, there was just silence on the line. I set the phone down on the table. I opened my browser. I found the non-emergency number for Metro Police Department. I dialed it. The woman who answered was professional and efficient. She asked what I was reporting. I told her. She asked if this was an emergency. I said no, but I needed to file a report and speak with someone in the financial crimes unit. She said they would have someone available on Tuesday afternoon. I said I had limited time. My mortgage refinance window was closing. I needed this on record. I needed documentation. She said Tuesday afternoon was the earliest available appointment. I asked what time. She said 2:14 p.m. I wrote it down. 2:14 p.m. on Tuesday, April 4th. The same day I'd discovered the fraud. The same day I'd found the documents. The same day I'd called my daughter and listened to her explain why she felt entitled to forge my signature. 8 hours after I hung up on her. 60 seconds after I made the call to the police department. My phone buzzed. A text from Jade. "Mom, I'm sorry. Please call me back." I did not call her back. I opened the voice memo app and stopped the recording. Then I played it back and transcribed it. Every word she'd said, every justification, every piece of evidence that she knew exactly what she had done and had convinced herself it was reasonable. I saved the transcription to my folder. Then I printed it out. 9 documents became 10. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the 10 pages in front of me. The sick day email, the calendar entry, the telehealth appointment, the CVS receipt, the insurance claim, the banking transaction, the text message from March 15th with the photo of the meal she'd cooked while she was driving a car, registered to her mother's credit, and now the transcript of her own words, admitting everything. I had built this moment, but I had not created it. I had created the conditions for it. 6 rescues, 6 yes answers, 6 demonstrations that I would absorb her consequences into my own life. But the moment itself, the choice to forge my signature, the decision to walk into a dealership and use my name without permission, that was Jade's. That was what she had chosen to do with the foundation I had built. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange, suspended state. I did not call my mother. I did not call Renata. I did not reach out to anyone. I just sat with what I had done, or rather, what I was about to do. At 12:14 p.m., I had called my daughter. At 12:15 p.m., I had hung up on her. At 12:16 p.m., I had called the police. At 2:14 p.m. On Tuesday, I was going to walk into the Metro Police Department Financial Crimes Unit and hand a detective a folder with 10 documents proving that my daughter had committed fraud. And I was going to be the one pressing charges. I did not know, in that moment, what that would cost. I knew what my mortgage refinance would cost me if I didn't do it. For $4,200 per year, the slow bleed of excess interest. I knew what my credit score would look like if that $28,000 loan stayed on my file. I knew what my debt-to-income ratio would be. I could calculate all of that. What I couldn't calculate was the cost of turning my own daughter over to the criminal justice system. What I couldn't calculate was what that would do to Rosa, my mother, who had already called twice and left messages asking if everything was okay, if I had spoken to Jade, if we could all just talk about this like a family. What I couldn't calculate was whether I would forgive myself, or whether Jade would forgive me, or whether any of us would come out the other side of this as anything resembling the family we had been. But I could calculate the cost of not doing it. I could calculate that with perfect clarity. So I sat at the kitchen table and I waited for Tuesday afternoon. And I did not second-guess myself. And I did not return Jade's texts. And I did not call my mother back. I just sat with the 10 documents and the folder and the knowledge that at 2:14 p.m., everything was going to change. And I was going to be the one who changed it. The first call came at 12:40 p.m. I was still sitting at my kitchen table, the 10 documents in front of me, my phone in my hand. Jade's name appeared on the screen. I answered. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't do this. Please." Her voice was high and thin, panic underneath it. "I made a mistake. I know I made a mistake. I'm going to call the dealership right now and tell them it was fraud. I'll tell them I forged the documents. I'll fix this. Just please don't call the police." I didn't say anything. What was there to say? She had already called the dealership. I would find this out later. And they had told her they couldn't reverse a loan once it had been funded, and the car had been released. The only way to fix this was the way I was about to fix it. Through documentation, through the police, through the formal machinery of the law. She didn't understand that yet. She was still operating in the world where problems could be solved by asking nicely, by apologizing, by promising to do better next time. "Did you call them?" I asked. "I'm calling them now. I'm going to tell them everything. Mom, I'm begging you. Please don't call the police. Please." "Did you call them yet?" "I'm about to. Just please give me a chance to fix this myself." I hung up, not to be cruel, but because there was nothing to fix. The loan was funded. The car was in her possession. The documents had been signed with my forged signature. The only thing left was to document it, report it, and let it move through the system. She called back 6 minutes later. This time, her voice was different, smaller. "I called them. They said they can't reverse it. They said if there's fraud, I need to contact the police myself and file a report." "I already did," I said. "You already called? You actually called?" "Yes." There was a silence. Then something in her voice shifted. The panic was still there, but underneath it was something harder. "This is so unfair. This is so unfair. Mom, you're going to ruin my life over this." I said, "You forged my signature." "I was going to pay for it. I was going to tell you. You're going to ruin my entire life. And I was going to pay for it." I didn't argue. I just hung up the phone. I set it face down on the table. And then, 17 minutes later, it rang again. "Rosa, my mother." Her voice came through steady, controlled, and absolutely certain that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. "Vivian, sweetheart, I just got off the phone with Jade. She's hysterical. She's crying so hard she can barely speak. I need you to listen to me. This is family. We do not do this to family. We do not call the police on our own children." I said, "She forged my signature, Mama." I know what she did. I know. But Vivian, listen to me. You've given her money 6 times over 6 years. You've paid for things. You've helped her. You've been there for her. She was working off an assumption based on what you taught her. She was working off a pattern. The words landed. Because she was right. That was the terrible part. Rosa was absolutely right. I had taught Jade, through 6 rescues and 6 yes answers, that her mother's resources were accessible. I had created the pattern, even if I had not created this particular choice. I sat in my kitchen and let my mother make her argument, and I couldn't find a way to argue back. Because she was not wrong. And Vivian, think about what a criminal record means. Think about her trying to rent an apartment. Think about her trying to get a job. Think about her filling out a background check and having to check the box that says, "Have you ever been convicted of a crime?" This will follow her for her entire life. This will follow her. My chest tightened, physically, like someone had taken a belt and cinched it around my ribs. I knew all of this. I had known it when I called the police. I knew it now. My daughter was going to have a criminal record. She was going to struggle to find housing. She was going to struggle to find jobs. Years from now, when she was trying to build a life, this decision I was making today was going to be waiting for her like a stone in her pocket. "I love her," Rosa said. "You know I love her, but I'm asking you. I'm begging you. Please call them back. Please tell them you've changed your mind. Family takes care of family. we don't send our children to prison. She's 24 years old. Mama, she's not a child. She is my granddaughter. She is your daughter. Please, I said, I have to go. And I hung up. But I didn't hang up because I was angry at my mother. I hung up because I could feel myself starting to crumble. And if I stayed on that call for another 30 seconds, I might actually say yes to what she was asking. I might call the police department back and cancel the appointment. I might convince myself that family loyalty was more important than protecting my own credit score, my own financial future, my own right to exist without someone else's consequences bleeding into my life. I didn't know how long I sat there. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe longer. I wasn't looking at the clock. I was just sitting in my kitchen with my mother's words in my head and my daughter's voice on repeat, and the knowledge that in a few hours I was going to walk into a police station and tell them that my own child had committed fraud. And there was nothing that was going to stop me. Then my phone buzzed. Not a call this time. A text from Renata. I'm here if you need anything. I called her back immediately. She answered on the first ring. Hi, honey. I'm losing my nerve, I said. I didn't say hello. I didn't apologize. I just told her the truth. Okay, she said. Tell me what's happening. Rosa called. She said I'm going to ruin Jade's life. She said Jade will never be able to rent an apartment or get a job because of a criminal record. She's not wrong. She's actually completely right. She's right about the consequences, Renata said. Is she right about what you should do? I didn't answer right away. Vivian, is she right about what you should do? No, I said. She's not. Okay, then you already know what the answer is. I know I'm about to give my daughter a criminal record. I know she's 24 years old, and she's going to be dealing with the consequences of that for the rest of her life. And I know I'm going to do it anyway. Yes, Renata said. You are. How do I live with that? The same way you've lived with everything else. One day at a time. And right now, you live with it by doing what you came to do. I was in my car by 1:47 p.m. The parking garage at my apartment building was cool and dim, the concrete walls magnifying the sound of the engine. I sat in the driver's seat with my hands gripping the steering wheel, looking at the clock on the dashboard. 2 hours and 47 minutes had passed since I'd called Jade. 8 minutes remained before I needed to walk into the Metro Police Department. I called Renata again. You've already made this decision, she said before I could say anything. You called me to hear yourself say it out loud. I used to be a person who said yes to everything. I said, I used to be a person who absorbed other people's problems. I don't know who I am if I'm not that person. You're a person who knows how to say no. You're just learning how to say it out loud. I said, she used my name. She took my name and she used it without asking. A beat. That's right, Renata said quietly. She did. And that's why you're doing this. I didn't say anything else. I just hung up the phone, put the car in reverse, and pulled out of the parking space. My hands were steady on the wheel. My breathing was even. The weight of what I was about to do was sitting on my chest like a stone, and I wasn't going to put it down. I was going to carry it into that police station and lay it down on Detective Faye Romero's desk. And I was going to tell her exactly what my daughter had done. The drive to the precinct took 12 minutes. I knew the city well enough to navigate it without thinking about it. Alderton and Pace was downtown, and the police precinct was just 5 blocks south on the same avenue. I'd driven past it 100 times. I'd never had a reason to stop. At 2:12 p.m., I pulled into the parking lot. 2 minutes early. I sat in the car for those 2 minutes, and I did not call Jade. I did not call Rosa. I did not second-guess myself. I simply sat there and waited for the clock to turn to 2:14. Boom. And when it did, I opened the car door and I walked across the parking lot toward the building. The precinct was smaller than I expected. Not cramped, but modest. The kind of place where the budget was stretched thin and the people who work there had learned to do important work with minimal resources. I approached the front desk. A woman in uniform looked up from her computer. "I have an appointment with Detective Faye Romero in the Financial Crimes Unit." I said, 2:14 p.m. Name. "Vivian Caldwell." She made a note. She picked up her phone. 30 seconds later, a woman appeared in the hallway. Late 40s, Latina, with the particular kind of composure that comes from having heard 1,000 versions of the same story and knowing how to tell the difference between the ones that matter and the ones that don't. "Ms. Caldwell, I'm Detective Romero. Come on back." I followed her down a hallway and into a small office. A desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, a computer. The kind of space where you don't waste time on comfort because the work is what matters. Detective Romero gestured to the chair across from her desk. "So, you're here to report identity theft and fraud?" I said. "My 24-year-old daughter forged my signature on a $28,000 auto loan on March 14th of this year. I was homesick that day. I have documentation proving where I was. I also have a recorded phone conversation where she admitted to the forgery. I want to file a report." Romero looked at me for a long moment. Then she opened a notebook and began to write. "Tell me everything," she said. And I did. I walked into the Metro PD Financial Crimes Unit at 2:14 p.m. on April 4th. The unit occupied the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like floor wax and burnt coffee. The walls were a shade of beige that had probably been fashionable 15 years ago. A woman at a front desk looked up from her computer. I gave her my name, and she said Detective Romero was expecting me. She gestured down a hallway with her pen, and I followed it to a small office with a single window overlooking the street below. Detective Faye Romero was in her early 40s. Latina, with dark hair pulled back in a functional bun, and eyes that had processed 1,000 versions of the same story. She stood to shake my hand. Her grip was firm. Her voice was careful, measured, the way you speak to someone who might break. "Ms. Caldwell, thank you for coming in. Why don't you tell me what brings you here today?" I sat down in the chair across from her desk. I placed the folder in front of me. Then I opened it and set out the documents in chronological order. The sick day email to my supervising attorney, the calendar entry, the telehealth appointment confirmation, the CVS receipt, with the insurance claim, the banking charge, the text screenshot, the credit alert notification. 9 pages. Then I placed the printed transcript of the voice memo next to them. Then I placed a handwritten timeline on top. 10 pages total. All of it laid out like evidence that I had come prepared. Detective Romero watched me set each document down. I watched her eyes track the placement. Oh, she didn't pick anything up yet. She just watched. And when I was finished, I said, my 24-year-old daughter forged my signature on a $28,000 auto loan on March 14th. I was homesick that day. I have documentation for that. I also have a recorded phone conversation where she admitted to the forgery. I want to file a report and press charges. Romero looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up the folder. She started reading. The sick day email first, then the calendar, then the telehealth record. She set those down. She picked up the credit alert screenshot. She looked at the timestamp, 6:47 a.m. Then she looked at the calendar entry next to it. The first document I'd saved after receiving the alert. She looked up at me. How long did it take you to get these documents together? She asked. I took the first screenshot at 6:51 a.m. I had most of them printed by 11:40 a.m. She looked back at the documents. You came in the same day. Yes. Most people wait 2 weeks, she said. And then the daughter has made 3 payments, and it starts to look like a domestic dispute over money instead of fraud. I didn't say anything. That wasn't a question. She picked up the voice memo transcript. She read it. All of it. Every word Jade had said about the rescues. About the $28,000 over the years. About needing to get the first 2 payments in before telling me. Romero's expression didn't change, but her posture shifted. She sat back in her chair. She set the transcript down. You recorded this? Yes. During the phone call at 12:14. Ma'am. Today. And she knew she was being recorded? No. But I'm in a one-party consent state, so I'm within my rights. Romero nodded slowly. She looked at the timeline I'd made. March 14th, March 15th, March 28th, April 2nd, April 4th, the loan signed, the meal photo sent, the payments made, the alert fired, the call placed, the report filed, all of it in sequence. You're a paralegal, she said. It wasn't a question. Senior paralegal, Alderton and Pace. She almost smiled. That explains the documentation. Most people come in here with a story. You came in with a case file. We spent the next hour and 48 minutes going through the intake. She asked me questions. I answered them. She took notes. She asked for clarification on the timeline. I provided it. She asked if I understood the implications of filing this report. I said yes. She asked me if I understood that proceeding would result in charges against the named individual, meaning my daughter would be charged with identity theft, forgery of a financial instrument, and fraudulent use of personal identifying information. I said yes. She asked me if I was aware that a conviction could result in jail time, probation, and a permanent criminal record. I said yes. She asked me if I wanted to continue. I said yes. She didn't ask me if I was sure. She didn't ask me if I wanted to think about it. She didn't ask me if I wanted to call my mother or talk to my daughter or reconsider. She simply began the formal process of filing the report. She logged each document. She recorded each timeline entry. She made note of the voice memo and the transcript. She asked me to sign a statement confirming that I understood the nature of the charges, the potential consequences, and that I was initiating the complaint of my own free will. I signed it. At 3:47 p.m., she printed out a case number. She handed it to me, written on a yellow Post-it note. I held it in my hand. The ink was still damp. The case number was 2024-FC-8847. My daughter's life, reduced to 6 numbers and 3 letters. "We'll conduct an investigation," Romero said. "We'll contact the dealership for their records. We'll contact the bank. We'll review the loan documents and compare the signature to your known signature. Once we have confirmation of the forgery, we'll prepare charges and send them to the prosecutor. You should expect to hear from us within 2 to 3 weeks." I nodded. "In the meantime," she continued, "I'd recommend that you contact your mortgage lender and inform them of the fraud. Well, get that loan removed from your credit file as quickly as possible. The civil piece of this will move faster than the criminal piece." I said, "I already have. I have documentation of the communication." She actually smiled this time. "Of course you do." I left the precinct at 4:08 p.m. The case number was on the yellow Post-it. I drove back to my apartment in silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just drove. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, the particular angle of spring afternoon light that makes everything look a little bit unreal. By the time I pulled into my parking garage, the light had softened into something almost beautiful. I sat in my car for a long time with the yellow Post-it on my dashboard. The case number was visible from where I was sitting, 2024-FC-8847. It felt both enormous and insignificant. Enormous because it represented the moment I had chosen to report my own daughter to the police. Insignificant because it was just a case number. One of thousands, one of millions. Just another number in a system that processed fraud and family betrayal as a matter of routine. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel the satisfaction of having won something. What I felt was heavier than that, and quieter. I felt the weight of the decision settling into my chest, and I understood that this weight was going to stay there. It wasn't going to lighten. It was going to become part of how I moved through the world from this point forward. I thought about Rosa, about the phone calls she would make, about the arguments she would mount, about the guilt she would try to install in me like software. I thought about Jade, about the conversations ahead, about what her life would look like when she discovered that forgiving your own child is not the same as protecting them from consequences. I thought about the 6 rescues, about the $11,400, about all the times I had said yes when I should have said no. And then I thought about something else. I thought about what the mortgage company had told me when I called them that afternoon. They had said they would remove the fraudulent loan from my credit report once they received the police report. They had said that once the loan was removed, I would qualify for the refinance. They had said that the closing date could be moved up from day 60 to day 58. They had said that at my current mortgage rate, the savings would be approximately $4,200 per year. For the rest of my 30-year mortgage, that was $126,000 over the life of the loan. That was the cost Jade had nearly made me absorb. That was the price of her entitlement, calculated down to the dollar. I picked up the yellow post-it. I looked at the case number one more time. Then I carefully placed it on my dashboard, where it was visible from the driver's seat, where it would stay until the criminal case was resolved. I wasn't putting it there for myself. I was putting it there as a reminder that I had done what needed to be done. A reminder that saying no to someone you love is not the opposite of love. It's sometimes the truest expression of it. I got out of the car and walked back to my apartment. The elevator smelled like someone else's dinner. The hallway was quiet. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it. The kitchen table still covered with the documents. The folder still open. The trace of a morning that had turned into something I would carry for the rest of my life. I sat down at the table. I opened my laptop. I began typing up the notes I would need for the legal documents that would follow. The civil claim against Lakewood Auto Group. The motion to remove the fraudulent loan from my credit file. The documentation that would accompany each filing. Because if I was going to do this, I was going to do it completely. I was going to be meticulous. I was going to be prepared. I was going to make sure that by the time this was over, there would be no doubt about what had happened and why, and no room for anyone to rewrite the story into something that made my daughter's actions look reasonable. Outside my window, the city was settling into evening. I could hear traffic from the street below. I could hear someone's television through the wall. I could hear the small sounds of ordinary life continuing. But inside my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow post-it in front of me. And I began the work of turning a betrayal into a case file. The legal system moves slowly, but it also moves methodically. Over the following 4 months, the case processed through channels that had been processing cases like this for decades. Jade was formally charged with 3 counts: identity theft, forgery of a financial instrument, and fraudulent use of personal identifying information. Each count carried potential jail time. Each count carried the promise of a permanent record. Within 48 hours of Vivian's supervising attorney, Marcus, reviewing the loan documents from Lakewood Auto Group, he identified something that changed the civil piece of the case entirely. Lakewood's own origination policy required that any loan applicant provide 2 forms of government-issued identification and that both be cross-verified before funding. The dealership's file contained only 1 form of ID, the forged Florida driver's license with Jade's photo and my name. Nobody had asked for a second form. Nobody had cross-checked the signature against anything. The loan had been funded based on paperwork that violated the dealership's own procedures. That gap, that single failure to follow protocol, became the leverage point in the civil claim. Lakewood's attorneys received a letter from Marcus. They reviewed their file. They looked at the policy. They understood, with the clarity of people facing potential liability, that they had made a mistake. Within 3 weeks, they offered a settlement. The fraudulent loan would be removed from Vivian's credit file. Lakewood would not contest the removal. Vivian would not need to file a separate civil suit. No litigation, no protracted court battle. Just an acknowledgement that the loan should never have been funded, and an agreement to erase it from her record, as if it had never existed. The criminal case took longer. Jade's attorney, a man who seemed genuinely confused by the fact that a mother would report her own daughter, made arguments about family dynamics, about the context of prior financial assistance, about the fact that Jade had made 2 payments on the loan, about the idea that this was a civil matter between family members, not a criminal one. The prosecutor listened to these arguments with the expression of someone who had heard them many times before. She presented the evidence, the forged signature, the recorded phone call in which Jade admitted to the forgery, the complete lack of consent from the actual borrower. She presented the fact that Jade was a 24-year-old woman with a job, not a desperate teenager with no other options. In September, 4 months after I filed the report, I received a letter informing me that Jade had entered a plea of guilty to all 3 charges. I was invited to submit a victim impact statement to be read at the sentencing hearing. I wrote it carefully, not in anger, not in vindication, just in facts. 214 words that laid out, in sequence, what the forgery had cost and what it had threatened. I stood in the courthouse on the day of sentencing. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. The judge was older, with the particular kind of weariness that comes from sentencing people who should never have gotten there in the first place. Jade sat at the defense table in clothes her attorney had probably told her to wear. Conservative, modest, designed to make her look like a daughter instead of a criminal. She didn't look at me. I read the victim impact statement aloud. My voice didn't shake. I had practiced it, but I had practiced it the way a paralegal practices, with precision, not with feeling. Your Honor, I am here to describe the impact of the defendant's actions on my life and my future. On March 14th of this year, the defendant forged my signature on a $28,000 auto loan without my knowledge or consent. I was homesick that day, and I have documentation proving my location and activities. The defendant is my daughter. I am 48 years old. I have spent 18 years since the end of my marriage, rebuilding my credit score from a position of significant debt. I have not missed a payment. I have not defaulted on an obligation. I have constructed a financial life that reflects responsibility and discipline. The fraudulent loan placed that 18-year investment at risk. It threatened to push my debt-to-income ratio past the threshold required for a mortgage refinance application that I had already been approved for. The difference between my current mortgage rate and the refinanced rate is $4,200 per year in savings. This refinance was going to provide financial security for the remaining years of my working life. The fraudulent loan threatened to eliminate that security. It threatened to cost me approximately $4,200 per year for the next 30 years. That is $126,000 in lost savings. Additionally, Your Honor, over the course of 6 years, I provided financial assistance to the defendant on 6 separate occasions. The total amount of that assistance is $11,400. The defendant's attorney has characterized this as evidence of consent, as proof that the defendant believed she had access to my credit as a shared resource. I want to be clear about what that characterization reveals. It reveals that my generosity, my willingness to help when my daughter was in crisis, was interpreted as permission. My love was confused with access. My help was redefined as an entitlement. The defendant did not ask for this loan because she believed asking was unnecessary. She believed that my resources were hers to use. That belief was built incrementally through 6 years of my saying yes. I take responsibility for having created the conditions that made this crime feel reasonable to her. But I also need this court to understand that protecting someone from the consequences of their actions is not love. It is the foundation for this. Your Honor, I am requesting that the court impose a sentence that reflects the seriousness of this crime and that protects me and others from further harm. I finished reading. I folded the paper. I sat down. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Jade's attorney. Your attorney submitted pre-sentencing documents, the judge said. That characterized the defendant's mother's prior financial assistance as prior history of voluntary financial assistance. Is that accurate? The attorney said, Yes, Your Honor. The judge picked up the pre-sentencing documents. He read the phrase again. He set them down. He looked at Jade. He paused. And the pause lasted approximately 10 seconds. In a courtroom, 10 seconds is an eternity. The defendant is sentenced, he said, to 36 months of supervised probation, mandatory financial literacy coursework, restitution of court costs in the amount of $2,400, and a formal record of conviction on all 3 charges. 36 months. 3 years of probation. A criminal record that would appear on every background check for the rest of her life. The financial literacy coursework was almost absurd in its specificity. It was as if the judge had read my victim impact statement and decided that Jade needed to understand, formally and under the supervision of the court, what financial responsibility actually meant. I sat in the courtroom and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief, not relief. I had come to the sentencing expecting to feel something that would make this whole ordeal make sense. Instead, I felt hollowed out. I had won. The case was decided. The fraudulent loan was being removed from my credit file. Jade had a criminal record. And somehow, none of that felt like victory. The loan was removed from my credit report within 6 weeks. My credit score adjusted. It went from 791 to 793. 2 points. 2 points higher than it had been on the morning I discovered the fraud. An artifact of the dispute process. The credit bureau explained. When you formally dispute a fraudulent loan, the lender's investigation triggers a recalculation that sometimes results in a small score improvement. I found neither irony nor satisfaction in those 2 points. My credit score had never been the point. My credit score was just the mechanism through which the theft had been quantified. I closed the mortgage refinance on day 58, 58 days from the April 4th alert to the September closing. The $4,200 per year in savings would be deposited into my account automatically. Month after month, for the next 30 years. I had not done this to become wealthy. I had done it to protect myself. And the protection, once it was in place, felt less like victory and more like what it actually was. Survival. I received a copy of Jade's formal sentencing order. I filed it away with all the other documents. The folder that had started as paper trail and became March 14th proof, and then became the case file that led to her conviction. I kept it. Not to remind myself of what had happened, to remind myself of what it looks like to stop protecting someone from the consequences of their own choices. To remind myself that sometimes love means saying no. And that sometimes saying no is the most powerful yes you can ever give. 8 months after the alert fired on my phone, I sat at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning and thought about the two things that would not stop sitting in my chest, side by side, refusing to resolve into a single narrative. The first thing was $11,400. 6 rescues spread across 6 years. A bounced rent check at 19. Lapsed car insurance at 20. A credit card at 22. An emergency room bill at 23. A security deposit at 23 again. A payday loan at 24. Each one a yes that felt like love. Each one a yes that taught Jade a very specific lesson. That her mother's resources were not finite. That consequences were things other people experienced. That the word no did not exist in any language that mattered. The second thing was a photograph. March 15th, the morning after Jade had walked into Lakewood Auto Group and forged my signature on a $28,000 loan. A plate of food, something homemade, a message underneath. Thinking of you. I had answered with a heart emoji. At the time, I thought she was being sweet. What I understood now was that she was managing guilt. She was doing what she had learned to do when she needed something from me. She was performing affection. She was performing care. She was performing the daughter I had always wanted her to be. The daughter I had been paying for through 6 years of rescue and absorption. The photograph and the $11,400 were not contradictions. They were the same thing. She had learned, through years of watching what happened when she asked, that taking was the same as asking if you took it from someone who had already said yes to everything else. She had learned that my love came with no boundaries, which meant my resources had no bottom, which meant I was a renewable resource. A woman who would keep saying yes as long as she kept asking, or as long as she made it look enough like an accident that I could tell myself I was helping instead of enabling. The meal photo was not guilt. It was calculation. It was a daughter who knew exactly what she had done and needed to make sure her mother still loved her, still saw her as the kind of person who cooks nice meals and thinks about her mother's well-being. It was a daughter managing her risk. And the risk she was managing was the possibility that I might, someday, stop absorbing her consequences into my own life. I had stopped. And the photograph would stay. Frozen in March. Proof of the exact moment she realized I might actually do it. I sat at my kitchen table 8 months later with a cup of coffee and a plate of eggs in front of me. There, the morning light was coming through the window at the same angle it came through every morning. The phone was face up on the counter next to me. No alerts. No emergencies. No calls from my daughter or my mother or anyone else who wanted to explain to me why what I had done was wrong. I was eating breakfast alone in my own apartment, and I was not performing peace. I was not performing anything. I was simply existing in a kitchen I had not had to leave, with financial security I had not had to surrender, with a credit score that was 2 points higher than it had been on the day everything changed. I picked up the coffee, and the mug was warm. The coffee was exactly the right temperature. Hot but not burning. I had learned over the course of my life to pay attention to small things like this. The exact temperature of coffee. The exact angle of morning light. The exact words someone uses when they are lying. The exact moment when love starts to look like permission. And permission starts to look like access. And access starts to look like entitlement. I drank the coffee. I ate the eggs. I did not think about Jade's sentencing or her probation or the financial literacy coursework that a judge had ordered her to take. I did not think about Rosa and what she was telling people about B. What version of this story she had constructed to make sense of why her granddaughter had a criminal record. I did not think about Renata, who had called me last week to tell me that she was proud of me, which had made me cry in a way I had not expected. What I thought about was the fact that both things were true. The $11,400 was real. The meal photo was real. My love was real. My entitlement to protect my own life was real. Jade's need to build a life independent of me was real. Jade's belief that my resources were hers to access was real. The forgery was real. The police report was real. The criminal record was real. All of it was true at the same time. And the truth was not a lesson about love or consequences or family or anything else that fit neatly into a moral framework. The truth was just, she took, and I reported it. And we both have to live with that. I set the coffee down. I looked at the phone on the counter. The phone that had fired an alert at 6:47 on April 4th. The phone that I had used to record my daughter's admission of guilt. The phone that still contained the screenshot of the meal photo, dated March 15th. That phone was just a phone. It held no magic. It had no power to resolve anything. It was just the tool I had used to document what had happened, the way a paralegal documents things. With precision, with care, with the understanding that the documentation is not the story. It is just the evidence. The story belongs to the people who lived it. I had lived it. Jade had lived it. Rosa had lived it. And we were all living the aftermath now, in different ways, carrying different versions of what it meant. But here is what I know. If you do not like what someone is doing, you have a choice. You can absorb it. You can pretend it is not happening. You can convince yourself that protecting them is more important than protecting yourself. You can say yes until the word yes becomes the only word you know how to say. Or you can do something about it. You can document. You can report. You can make them face the consequence of their choice instead of absorbing it into your own life. Most people choose the first path. Most people absorb. I know this because I spent 6 years absorbing. I know what it feels like to make your love bigger and bigger so that it can contain someone else's entitlement. I know what it feels like to mistake protection for love, and patience for forgiveness, and generosity for evidence of consent. I know what it looks like when you teach someone, through 6 years of yes answers, that they can take whatever they want from you because you will always say yes. But I also know what it looks like to stop. I know what it feels like to watch what people do when they think there is nothing you can do about it, and then to do something about it anyway. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the mug. I set it on the drying rack. And I went about my day the way I go about every day now, not celebrating, not grieving, not performing anything, just living, just existing in a life that is mine and will stay mine because I chose to protect it. The question people always ask me is, do you regret it? Do you regret reporting your daughter? And I never answer that question the way they expect. I don't say no, of course not. I don't say yes. It was the hardest decision of my life. I just look at them and I say, I regret the 6 years of yes. I regret teaching her that my love meant she could take anything. I regret creating the conditions that made the forgery feel reasonable to her. But reporting it, protecting my own financial future, making her face the consequence of her own choice instead of absorbing it into mine, that I don't regret, that I would do again in the same situation without hesitation. That's not a lesson. That's just the truth about what it looks like when you finally stop absorbing someone else's life into your own.